So I went out to Washington, D.C. and attended, something else you and I really enjoy talking about is IP, intellectual property, innovation, antitrust. And this meeting called LeaderShIP takes place in Washington. It's basically a combination of regulators, policymakers, lobbyists, analysts, enterprise business leaders. And, I think the quote unquote item that came to the forefront of this meeting is semiconductors are having a moment. Anyone that probably watched television or the news 3 years ago, you would have said, what do you think about semiconductors? They would have been like, what's a semiconductor? Right. Nobody really even knew. It was a small little industry, not really, but it was a small little industry in terms of, government officials didn't really care. They care about automotive. They care about manufacturing. They care about jobs. And in the end, what happened is we had this little pandemic. And amidst this pandemic, we kind of had, some supply chain issues for things like vehicles that people care about, iPhones and other devices and laptops that people care about. And suddenly we couldn't get things, our televisions and our, whatever toys we wanted to buy, we couldn't get them. And what happens when suddenly people can't get their stuff is that, lawmakers take notice. And so semiconductors came into focus. And effectively what's going on now is we, over the last 30 years or so, the United States has done a couple of things. One is we've, in a very positive note, we've continued to be the leader on a world scale in terms of the design and research of next generation semiconductors. We've also concurrently become completely dependent on the rest of the world to do all of our manufacturing. Sounds a little bit like what we've done in oil and gas and what we've done in information services and employees and consulting and outside. We basically outsourced it all. And so when suddenly, China shuts down, when, Taiwan shuts down during the pandemic, when companies didn't know what was going to happen, we couldn't get our stuff, couldn't get our chips, and the whole supply chain was exposed as broken. This meeting was focused on a couple of different things. And Pat, we could probably do a whole show on this. We did have a great episode with the chief economist of Qualcomm where we talk about a lot of this. But the meeting sort of addressed two or three things. It addressed the CHIPS Act, which is all about repatriating some of our manufacturing. It also focused on the need for government policymakers and lawmakers not to lose sight of the fact that we are the leader in terms of research and design and intellectual property, which companies like Qualcomm, but a lot of other companies, create this IP, needs to be protected. And was a big part of the story too, is because we have lawmakers in the current administration, people in the, that basically want to take power away from the inventors of technology to give more power to the implementers. And so going back to many conversations that we had over the years, this was what happened with the Apple Qualcomm case, but this is what's happened with China and just about everything we invent is when you take away power from the inventor to license and protect that license, you actually risk the leadership of our country in terms of design, research, and then ultimately the manufacturing of semiconductors. So that was a big topic in focus. And so the CHIPS Act really was about how much do we need to bring back in terms of repatriating, and do we need to bring it back? And there seems to be some mixed opinion there. The other key focal point was China, right? Was how big of a threat is China? And there seems to be some inconsistent reactions to that because they're a big trading partner. A lot of our stuff comes from China. And so, in any actions that we might take to give the U.S. more power and take some of that away from China, there's always risk on the geopolitical standpoint. So that was a big topic in focus. And then it was, how do we protect the inventor? And that largely the implementers are getting stronger and stronger, both here in the US and on a global scale. And those that are spending the money, decades of research, Pat, which you often say, a lot of R, and very little R and a lot of development, Well, the R, the people that are taking 10 years to help develop a standard like 5G or 6G, how are they actually going to be protected if they spend all that time and all that effort to carry forward innovation, and then people license it and pay appropriately for that work that's been done? So again, it's hard in a few minutes to summate all that went on at this meeting, but you know, I guess my kind of take and conclusion is that we're at a very interesting crossroads for policy, antitrust, and national security. My biggest takeaway here is that we have to not only focus on repatriating manufacturing. That's part of what we have to do. But it's actually, we cannot lose sight of the fact that we are leading in innovation and design in the semiconductor space. Semiconductors run everything we do. Our phones, our cars, our software, our clouds, all on semiconductors. Pat can't run it on air. And long story short, if we don't protect, we take away things like injunctive relief, we allow implementers around the world to take the IP that's being developed here and run with it without having the ability to, you know, use the legal system efficiently, we're going to create a lot of risk for our ongoing leadership. And we have already done that with our manufacturing. So hopefully we have a plan, but I wouldn't say I left confident. I left even more uncertain as to exactly how we're going to take this forward. You
preach, buddy. You preach. That was a good 8 minutes.
That was not 8 minutes. That was like 4.
Oh, it was? Okay.
It just felt like forever, dude.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It felt like forever.
So, no, I'm going to try my best to be additive here. It's not this simple, but, you know, it's funny. We're sitting back looking at Germany's reliance on Russia, and they were warned, and now they're really looking not as smart as it could be with the invasion of Ukraine. Well, we're kind of like even bigger reliance on China as a company for some very strategic infrastructure that we have for military, for banking, finance, healthcare, and things like that. So here we are. We are in this situation, and I think you'd be a fool to think that there's less than a 50% chance that China invades Taiwan at some point and tries to repatriate it, like Crimea or Donbass or something like that. So we really need to be serious about this. And, you know, I'm with you on, you must give inventors back the value that they've created. Otherwise, they're not going to create. That is just the wheel of innovation. Government can't be the innovator, right? And if you can't make money off of research, the big R, and don't confuse the R and the D, then it's going to stop. And essentially, if we're not doing the research in this country, then somebody else will. Our government is not going to be able to do the research that requires. There is not a single country out there that does that. I think the only caveat there might be some of the university research that China does, which is funded by the government. But we haven't made that work great here. And, you know, it's a game. The folks who don't want to incent the research and the innovators are, just like you said, they're the people downstream. I'm not going to name names, but they're the people who want to make everything open source because they have been the arbiters of aggregation of all that innovation. And, you know, they're some of the top companies that are out there that are fighting against giving money to the innovators out there. So very important stuff. I'm hoping that we don't degrade and go back to an era where we were 4 or 5 years ago, where there was a question on whether there was going to be benefit from innovating or not. And I think we also have to have a long-term strategy, not one that goes between different administrations. Because as we've seen, any yo-yoing will just has the effect to limit the amount of research that companies do out there.
Yeah, you said a lot of great things, and I'm going to pretty much leave it at that. I think what's super interesting is that most of our policymakers can't see past next week. Everyone's focused on manufacturing because that's the problem we're trying to solve. It's the paper cut, right? I need a Band-Aid. We need to do it, but it's not the only thing. And so hopefully we'll focus on both, doing what we need to do for the short term, but also protecting ourselves and the leadership we've invested in